Throughout my years watching shows and movies, I have seen people come up with very interesting theories where they predict what will happen next in a show or movie. Unsurprisingly, Amphibia is one of those shows where fans came up with a bunch of theories ranging from being totally reasonable to absolutely ridiculous. Of course, when there are so many theories circulating throughout the community, a few of them will eventually be confirmed or come true. Marcy getting possessed by the core? That turned out to be true. Anne sacrificing herself to save Amphibia? That also turned out to be true. Sasha being bisexual? Again, that turned out to be confirmed. However, for every theory that was confirmed, there was another where it was debunked and never came true. And as a result, most of them went away where people stopped talking about them. All of that is a shame though, because a lot of the theories I do remember seeing when Amphibia was still airing new episodes were absolutely fascinating, and I presume many of you watching probably never heard of them before. So what are some of these debunked/forgotten theories from the Amphibia fandom? When I asked this question on Twitter, yes, I'm still calling it that, the most common answer I got that many people seem to remember was Anne losing an arm. The general idea is that towards the end of the series, Anne will use up her calamity powers to defeat Andreas and the core, but she would lose her arm in the process. As ridiculous as this theory sounds looking back in hindsight, in my defense, it did sound rather plausible at the time. Keep in mind, this theory was created around when True Colors premiered and we saw this.
I just need to...
In fact, this scene sort of opened the floodgates towards rather dark, gruesome theories, and I'll cover a few more of those later in this video. When a scene as physically brutal as this was allowed to be shown on Amphibia, then it seemed possible that Anne, Sasha, or other major characters in the show could also be brutally injured or worse. It's not just the precedent of True Colors that led many of us to believe Anne would lose her arm, of course. The reason why many of us, including me, believed it was Anne who would lose her arm was because there were quite a handful of scenes where she injured her arm throughout the show, and we saw other beings lose limbs and get impaled too. In addition, when Anne stated how her calamity powers were physically exhausting her every time she used them, there was a possible method that could cause her to lose a limb.
Now can someone please open this door for me? I'm trying to move my arms and nothing's happening.
Also, you cannot really argue that it's too brutal for a character to lose an arm, because we have seen other cartoons do it before and after Amphibia. Now all of that is pretty solid evidence for this theory, but the reason why I think it looks ridiculous in hindsight was because we forgot about the storytelling aspect of it. Whenever you come up with a theory, one of the things you have to consider is how would it add to the story's narrative in a positive way. If Anne lost her arm towards the end of the series, that would not really add anything meaningful to her story. She would have nothing to learn in the long term if she were to lose one of her limbs, and it would have just been seen as unnecessary torture for Anne. Now, some might point out that could also be said with Anne's death, which did end up happening, but remember, her death was not really permanent, well, depending on how you look at it at least.
I made a copy of you right before you expired, a backup if you will. For all intents and purposes, you're the same Anne Boonchoi.
Well, that's gonna cause some serious existential dread later on.
Overall, as interesting this theory was, I'm glad it did not come true, and the ending we did get was a lot more emotional because of that. Still, this theory does live on in some form through fan alternate scenarios. Also, it's worth noting that the general theory of some important character in the show will lose an arm did turn out to be true. We were just wrong on who it was.
Sasha!
Speaking of which, people also had a similar theory for Sasha. However, instead of losing an arm, people thought she would lose an eye. Similar to the Anne losing an arm theory, this one stemmed from the precedent set in True Colors where brutal violence is possible within the show. Like the losing an arm theory, people pointed out how there are many scenes where we see characters and robots lose eyes, and many of those scenes revolved around Sasha. Also, some have pointed out that in the end of the Season 3 intro, Sasha is shown right next to characters who either have one eye or have rough vision, which could have been seen as foreshadowing. However, like the arm theory, Sasha losing an eye just does not make sense in the grand scheme of her story arc. Keep in mind, she almost lost her eye already back in Reunion during her fight with Anne. That initial scar was kind of a visual warning sign for what would have happened if Sasha did not change her ways. Of course, it did take a while for her to change, but by the time Sasha did change her ways, she still had both eyes, and losing one of them at that point would have just been seen as unnecessary punishment for her. So like the disarmed theory,
Get it? Disarmed?
I'm glad this theory did not become reality. Although the general theory of Sasha getting a major injury or scar from a fight did turn out to be true. We were just wrong on where she will be injured. However, that injury did not really matter much because she managed to walk it off in the end. Anyways, let's switch gears to a forgotten theory that I actually created myself. In the month leading up to Amphibia's series finale, I made a theory involving Sprig, and I believed that in the final episode, he would be the one who destroys the Calamity Box. Side note, I actually made a video about my theory on this a while back, but I don't recommend you guys check it out because that was my very first video on YouTube where I spoke and gave commentary, so the quality of my voice was rather terrible, although the audio quality in my latest videos are not really that much better, but hey, I like to believe there's some improvement. Ow. Anyways, my theory about Sprig destroying the box was largely based on a key observation where I noticed that throughout the entire show, Sprig has never intentionally held the box. Yeah, he technically held the box in some of the promo material, but I don't think that counts. I rewatched the entire series so many times over, and in every scene where Sprig and the Calamity Box were present, he never held it. Meanwhile, Anne obviously held the box so many times because she's the main character, as well as Sasha, Marcy, Andreas, Hop-Up, even Grime and Polly held the box at some points in the show. Keep in mind, Sprig is the second most important character of the show behind Anne, so for him to never hold the box at all in front of us just does not make sense at face value. But then came the episode The Core and the King, where we learned that the last time a small pink frog held the Calamity Box, it became lost and hidden away from Amphibia for 1,000 years. So the idea with my theory is that in the final episode, once all the fighting is over, the characters will acknowledge that the Calamity Box is too powerful and dangerous for anyone to wield, therefore it must be destroyed. And I thought it would be poetic for Sprig to do that because it was his ancestor who wanted to get rid of the box initially. Since Leaf was the one who started the process, it seemed right for Sprig to finish it. But of course, what ended up happening at the end of the series is that after the Calamity Gems were reduced to shards, Valeriana used the box to open one last portal for Anne, Sasha, and Marcy to return home. After the portal closes, the shards have been used up and the Calamity Box disintegrates, not on Sprig's hands, but on Valeriana's hands. What that means is that Sprig will forever be the only major character to never hold the Calamity Box. Unless someone ever recreates it, of course, which seems extremely unlikely right now. Matt, please make an Amphibia movie or something. I'm not gonna lie, out of all the theories, I'm pretty bummed out that this didn't turn out to be true. And it's not just because it's my personal theory. Looking back in hindsight, I still think it would have made sense if the Calamity Box did get destroyed by Sprig after the final portal closed, and it would have wrapped up Sprig's arc in a very poetic way like I mentioned before. But I guess I can't be too upset about my theory not coming true, because if it did, we would have never gotten that one last hug between Anne and Sprig. Also, after learning how Valeriana is the actual creator of the Calamity Box, and she was a ghost the whole time, then it also makes a lot of sense for her to be the one who held the box last. Moving on from Sprig, there were also a couple of genuinely forgotten theories about Marcy that I remembered to be rather interesting. The first one is about what she would be like. Remember, we were not formally introduced to Marcy at all until Marcy at the Gates in Season 2. So for the longest time, our theories for Marcy's personality were largely based on the few snippets we see of her in Season 1 and some of the promo posters for Season 2. With just a limited set of information available, some people believe that Marcy would be a person who is even more manipulative and probably immoral compared to Sasha. Her somewhat sinister smile in the scene where Anne steals the Calamity Box alluded to this possibility. And this theory was later reinforced when we learned that it was Marcy who discovered the box and suggested it should be her birthday present to Anne. Then, when you look at some of the early Season 2 posters, Marcy is portrayed as a mysterious character, one who may have hidden motives. Of course, most of this speculation did turn out to be false. Marcy was not as manipulative or sinister as Sasha at the time, and she turned out to be a fun, loving, clumsy nerd who is misunderstood by a lot of people. In other words,
Marcy is completely different from Sasha. She's harmless.
Well, on the surface at least. While we were wrong about Marcy being more authoritarian than Sasha, we were semi-right about Marcy having a hidden motive. The main difference from the initial theory is that Marcy was not trying to be sinister and mistreat Anne and Sasha like what we initially thought. Instead, her plan to trap them was more of an act of desperation, which ended up kind of working out for her. Overall, although the theorized version of Marcy sounds cool, I absolutely preferred the version of Marcy we did end up getting. And clearly, nearly all of you agree with me there. Speaking of Marcy, there is one more theory regarding her, specifically what would happen to her after True Colors. And let's just say this theory is probably the most interesting one out of all the theories I mentioned in this video. So to put it simply, some people in the Amphibia community, including me, thought that after this happened to Marcy,
I just need to...
we thought she would stay dead, and at least for the first half of Season 3, she would be brought back to life by a resurrection spell. Looking back, this theory sounds rather ridiculous, but the story behind it is rather intriguing. You see, this theory was actually born in the midst of the True Colors delay and subsequent leak. If you want to know more about the situation about True Colors at the time, you can check out my video on it. But the main thing to keep in mind is that some people saw the episode without seeing the Season 3 intro that was shown in the episode's official premiere. So as a result, the people who saw the leak did not know that Andreas would keep Marcy alive via rejuvenation tank. However, we all still believe that Marcy had to come back from this incident alive in some way because it would be too dark if she was permanently killed off. But at the time, the only way we know to bring a life form back to life was a resurrection spell like what we saw in the episode Maddie and Marcy. Now, there are multiple versions of this theory with different ideas of how it would play out, but the general idea is that Sasha and Grime would recover Marcy's body and escape from the castle with her. When they arrived in Wardwood, Sasha would ask Maddie if she could bring her back to life. She would believe it's possible, but it requires a very long process to create a more powerful version of the resurrection spell. Keep in mind, the resurrection spell that we saw in the show only works on small animals, and even then, it's not really that effective. Over the course of a few episodes in Season 3A, Sasha would learn about the magical aspects of Amphibia and build up her relationships with the people of Wardwood. Some variations of this theory also alluded to Marcy being a ghost in Season 3A, where she interacts with Sasha beyond the grave, which could have given us some great Sasha Arcee moments. Eventually, she and Maddie would bring Marcy back to life by the time Anne and the Planters returned to Amphibia in the mid-season finale. Once they reunited, the trio would work together and create the army needed to take down Andreas and take back the Calamity Box. From that point on, well, who knows, I guess. So yeah, as fascinating this theory was, we of course did not get that. Shortly after seeing the Season 3 intro as a post-credit scene in True Colors, it was immediately debunked, and from it came the rise of the Possessed Marcy theory, which did turn out to be true. While the Possessed Marcy storyline turned out fine in my view, part of me still wished the resurrection theory came true because it would have allowed more episodes to show Sasha build up her relationship with the frogs in Wardwood, as well as develop the relationship between her and Marcy, which is somewhat lacking in the actual series. But on the bright side, this theory does live on in some fan AUs, which I highly check out. I'll try to find them and link them below if I can find it. Looking back at all these theories, as ridiculous as some of them were in hindsight, they really show just how creative the Amphibia community is and why I choose to be a part of it. There are a lot more theories that I could bring up, but these are the ones that I remember well enough. Although, if you guys want to see a continuation of this video, write down any old Amphibia theories you guys remember in the comments, and please give this video a like and subscribe for more content like this. Also, thanks again to Seb13, MB Command Nerd, and Matthew Falcon for supporting this channel directly, and thank you for watching this video. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next one.